Every week, Surfing the MASH Tsunami brings you three major stories from the world of steatotic liver disease. This weekend, we're bringing you each of these stories separately so you can listen over a shorter, discrete period of time. Hope you enjoy them.
For the last 5 years, MASLD stakeholders, whether manufacturers, trial sites, providers, payers, patients, or investors, have turned to Surfing the MASH Tsunami to keep track of drug and device development, epidemiology, public health initiatives, and practice patterns. This weekend, we are sharing the three main sections from our episode 7. Roger will provide more information after these notes from our sponsors.
Surfing the MASH Tsunami is sponsored by these healthcare-related organizations.
Regeneron is a leading biotechnology company that invents, develops, and commercializes life-transforming medicines for serious diseases. Founded and led by physician scientists, their unique ability to repeatedly translate science into medicine has led to numerous approved treatments and product candidates in development, most of which were homegrown in their laboratories. They are shaping the next frontier of medicine with data-powered insights from the Regeneron Genetics Center and pioneering genetic medicine platforms, enabling them to identify innovative targets and complementary approaches to potentially treat diseases like obesity and MASH.
LiverRight and the LiverRight Scanning Network. LiverRight is America's first virtual specialty clinic for liver disease, offering adults in all 50 states video appointments and helping GI practices and health systems triage and treat the swelling numbers of patients seeking MASLD and MASH testing. LiverRight offers same-week video visits and accepts insurance. For more information, contact LiverRight. That's liver then R-I-G-H-T as if one word, at www.liverright.com.
Tawazun Health, your partner in global liver health innovation. At Tawazun Health, we specialize in providing small or large-scale access to FibroScan examinations for liver health-focused early detection, clinical trials, independent research, and collaborative projects with clinicians and FibroScan providers, now in over 30 countries around the globe. As industry-leading experts, we design and deliver high-quality FibroScan services because we know that accurate, high-quality, reliable data drives better outcomes. To learn about Tawazun Health or our sister lifestyle app, mylife365.me, click the Tawazun Health link on the Surfing MASH homepage. And now, Global Liver Institute President and CEO Larry Holden joins Roger for this week's Newsmaker segment.
This week, our newsmaker is GLI President and CEO Larry Holden. Larry addresses two issues related to the current goings-on in Washington. First, he acknowledges that we are in for what he calls dark times under the current administration and describes some of the decisions and challenges that we face. I'd call that heart-wrenching. Second, he suggests what individuals and organizations can do to create the best possible situation and even some wins for people living with liver disease. These suggestions reflect Larry's 30-year career on Capitol Hill prior to his joining GLI. So our guest this week could qualify as a newsmaker or as an expert, either one. Larry Holden is the president of Global Liver Institute. Been in that position since exactly when, Larry?
Since September of last year.
Okay. As you know, we'd had Larry's predecessor, Donna Cryer, on the podcast a few times. This is our first time with Larry. I'm hoping that we'll do two of these in relatively short order. This week, Larry is appearing to talk really about what's going on with the government in the U.S., and I think we're all reading about it in the U.S. in the newspapers. But I'm not sure we know exactly what it means for liver patients, so I'm hoping we'll get to both the good and the bad of that. And then in advance, an invitation to have you back within the next few weeks and talk about GLI and what GLI has been doing since last September. So to start, Larry, do me a favor, take a minute or two and tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to assume this position last September and
Sure.
What you're doing with it right now.
Happy to. Thanks, Roger. It's good to see you again. I've been with Global Liver Institute for 5 years and started out originally as chief of staff and then became the chief operating officer. I'm working with Donna Cryer, our founder, and then assuming the president and CEO role in September. But more importantly to all of that was my work previously working with Congress. So I spent about 30 years working in politics in Washington, D.C., in different forms, fashions. I worked in the United States Senate for a senator from Colorado, and I lobbied on behalf of a few organizations. And then I also was chief of staff to a congressman from Connecticut. So those experiences gave me the insider view of how to make the sausage, so to speak. And hopefully that I can bring that skill set to bear on helping the Global Liver Institute and our liver patients.
Okay, that's helpful. And then one thing we ask everyone to do the first time they're here is tell us one thing about yourself that we wouldn't know or necessarily guess if you didn't tell us, something a little bit unusual.
Sure. Well, I don't have a liver disease. I am a caregiver to 2 family members that have liver disease, and that's not known very much. But also, as a more of a fun fact, when I worked for the government, I did some national security work, and I was able to fly a Black Hawk helicopter with the Sikorsky test pilot, and that was an interesting experience. So not many people that are able to fly a Black Hawk.
What was the most striking thing about the experience for those of us who have to live vicarious through you since we've never done it? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a pretty brave soul, but I'll tell you what, that when the rotors actually push you up, and then imagine riding the highest roller coaster, that's the fastest thing you've ever been on, and then it dives down, and the whole front of it's glass. So as it's diving down, all you see, I was in the co-pilot seat, and all you see is the ground rushing up to you as the rotor drives you down. I couldn't pull on my harness hard enough, and by the time we got pulled out of it, I was almost balled over because I had pulled my harness and I'd pulled myself into a little knot. But quite an experience. It's an eye-opener for certain.
For those of you who've wondered, we probably asked this question at this point to over 100 people on this podcast, and I think you certainly qualify as the top 10 on that. Let's dive on into our interview. It's been roughly 6 months since the Trump administration came to office, a week or two since the passage of his one big, whatever you want to call it, bill, and maybe 4 months since RFK Jr. has taken over HHS. Outside the Beltway, it all looks like chaos. And this is an audience that wants to know. So speaking for the liver community, what's going on that people need to know about right now, or has gone on that people need to understand either way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are tough times, without question. The early days of the administration, our big concern were cuts to programs, cuts to employees. What does that mean for liver patients? Well, in the case of NIH, the National Institutes of Health, that meant studies being shut down. Many of those studies were longitudinal. So if you end of study, you can't pick it up later on and just continue it. You lose the data set, and that study cannot continue. It must be restarted. So that all of the data that was collected prior to that shutdown is worthless data. So we're looking at programs being shut down, research programs. We're looking at the employees being cut. The other big concern, and I've had some conversations with some of the companies that we deal with in this space, is the employees at the FDA. If you lose institutional knowledge, you lose your ability for that pipeline to bring drugs and life-saving technologies to our patients. And whether or not it slows it down or completely stops up that pipeline is to be seen. But that's a major concern. Even if they bring in other folks, we've lost that institutional knowledge and we've lost that ground. So we have studies that have research being cut. We have employees leaving FDA and CMS. All of those directly impact our patients. And then you have the general sense of concern for, say, the legislation that just passed. And what does that mean for patients that are on Medicare, Medicaid, and the lack of insurance or the lack of programs, rural hospitals being shut down? These are all things, these are real life moments for our patients. These are not theory. It's not something that just is happening in a vacuum in Washington. It's something that actually is happening to our fellow colleagues, our patients, and our friends and our family members. And it's something that we're keenly aware of and something that we're working on.
So at a high level, those are the headlines that we read in the newspaper, right? Can you pick a couple of specific examples that you've seen, maybe studies that are discontinuing, a specific example that people can touch about what that means?
Yeah, it's a little hard to do that only because some of the cuts early on, they came in a way that it was hard to pinpoint what the direct impact was going to be. And I think that was done in a strategic way. We are now hearing more about that. So the programs that are run by, say, universities. So if a research study is done by a university and they were funded to go ahead and do that research, they may still have a grant to do research, but they no longer have funds to do the administrative side of running that research, which means the computers and the phones and the actual building that they use and the lights that are turned on, or the centrifuge machines, the equipment that they use. So there's an impact of just the moment in time with that research, but there's a follow-on impact that we're concerned about. And, we're starting to hear more of the actual data. In the early stages, a lot of it was anecdotal. And now we're starting to hear from the researchers in these institutions of the direct impact. Definitely the pipeline at FDA. We know from our experience, from our colleagues, people that we've dealt with over the years, people are leaving the FDA. They're going to go do something else. And when they leave, that leaves a gap. Having said all of that, our hope is to continue to work with this administration. We understand it's a democracy and we have different administrations come and go, and we have to find a way to work within this system now to affect positive change and to find some common ground with RFK Jr., with the Trump administration, and find areas where we can work together to work on behalf of liver patients. And we've seen some areas where we can do that as well.
Okay, so then let's flip the script. Let's do the areas where you think you can work together first. And then I do want to come back and give people, to the degree that we can, a clearer sense of the kinds of implications, the kinds of things that you've described so far. But if you want, we can flip the script and we can talk about places of ability to work commonly and then come back to the other stuff. So can you give an example of where are we finding success?
Sure. I think we know that RFK Jr., his focus has been nutrition. And so we know that that's an area where that we can work with him and work with the administration. The reality is, as you know, for MASH and MASLD patients, the fact of diet and exercise and nutrition has a direct impact on whether or not they have survivability and the progression of the disease. So that's an area where we can work on. Obesity medications. We know that removing barriers for those patients to be able to access drugs and technologies, emerging technologies, is critically important. So working with this administration to see that the obesity medications are covered by CMS, which would in turn give us a door to have them covered by payers, is something that we're working on. So there are some opportunities. We're also working with Congress on the VA. As you probably know, we got some language inserted into the VA MilCon appropriations bill. And that language specifically said that they shouldn't use biopsy if it's not required before prescribing medication to our MASH patients. That's critically important. Every time a barrier is put in place for one of our patients, between the patient and the doctor making a decision on what's best for their health care, and whether that's the payer or the VA or any insurance carrier, those barriers, they save money on the front end. They cost money and they cost lives. And it's our job as the Global Liver Institute, we're going to fight on behalf of patients to remove those barriers.
So that's great. And particularly the thing about the obesity meds is extremely promising. However, or conversely, if the obesity and related problems are greatest in areas of food insecurity, and those tend to be characterized by lower income, and patients are being pushed off Medicaid or state Medicaids are controlling access to GLP-1s, when I read the newspaper, that almost sounds like the Bermuda Triangle of bad news for that patient population. A, am I reading it right? That those are real issues? Or am I overstating? And is there anything that you're doing or can do to actually support those patients in that situation?
Unfortunately, Roger, I think there is a bit of a Bermuda Triangle here. And it's not just in this area. It's for liver patients in general. I think that what we have to do is, as I said before, I think we have to find areas where we can work with the administration and find areas of hope and opportunity to move the ball down the field, as I call it. We're not going to win the game and we're not going to win the big hits right now. What we're going to do is we're going to look after the patients. And it might be these smaller wins, like making sure that there's coverage with CMS or making sure that there's no barrier from the VA department. To your point about the states, we know that a lot of this is going to be pushed to the states. The federal government is pulling back its funding, and so the burden is going to be on the states. For GLI, what that means is instead of there being necessarily just one place where we go, and we have to do that work with Congress, the House and the Senate, and the administration, we are now looking at what we need to do to have a state-based response and an impact on the state level. And we're doing that in the rare space through putting liver patients on the RDACs, Rare Disease Advisory Councils, continuing to push the envelope at the state level. That's hard because there's 50 states plus the territories, and we're going to have an ability to do that. We do that with our Liver Action Network. We do that with our local affiliates. We do that with our patients that are in the field.
Couple of thoughts. Does that require expanding the advocacy programs?
Yeah, without question. That's always been our plan. We knew that when we initially launched our Liver Action Network, I think we had 14 states covered with our nonprofits. We're now, I think, at 28 or 29, plus I have 4 countries, and I've got some other affiliates that are coming on board that are disease-specific affiliates to the land. But the end of the day, it's all for the same purpose. We have to build an infrastructure of advocates that are able, when the time is right, to activate and to be local, either whether it's at the state level or whether it's at the federal level. What do we need to do to educate and prepare those advocates to respond? And that's the infrastructure that we started building 3 years ago, and we'll continue to build that out. But that is an expansion, and that will be ongoing. We'll also see that globally as well.
Talk about globally for a minute before we come back to the States. What are the needs globally that are similar to or different from the needs in the States, and how are you addressing those?
Well, one of the things that we've been working on is we're trying to get MASH listed as an NCD, a non-communicable disease, with the World Health Organization. What that would do, it would elevate the liver and liver health issues to its proper place alongside heart disease and lung disease and some of the primary the diseases that we see. It would elevate that and give us the ability to have funds released on the international level, as well as to get exposure to it. We know that MASH and MASLD is an epidemic. We know that it's rising, possibly 1 in 3 people that have some form of liver disease. If we can catch those patients early, we can get them out of the pipeline that ends up in liver cancer and death. That's our goal. So the more we can elevate and educate and get folks out of that pipeline, then we're doing our job. So we're building this network that we started in the United States, which is a Liver Action Network, having a global facet, and we're putting satellite places around the world where we know that there's reasons to be there first, and we're starting to build that out. So there's going to be some in North Africa, there's going to be one in Australia, there's going to be one in a few other places, and as we do those, the opportunity for us as an organization is to educate and teach advocacy and build that army, if you will, of advocates bigger and stronger to affect change greater in the long run.
North Africa is interesting, right? Not necessarily a place with a lot of government funding, but a place with exceptional patient need.
Yeah, this is, to your point, you brought this up before, whether it's in the United States or whether it's around the globe, this is really about access. And we know the underserved communities, underserved populations, the need is oftentimes greatest there. It's easier to do something in New York City or in LA where you have this infrastructure and you have funding. It's a lot harder to do it in Tuscaloosa. It's a lot harder to do it in, say, Cairo. These are the places that we need to focus. We need to focus where there's need. And each patient is critical to us. Every patient is a life, is a family member, is a loved one. And it's our job to try and get that access to care to all of them.
One of the things I think I'm hearing between the lines of what you're saying is that this will not be an era when we're going to have successes on macro scale, but we may have a need to focus on what individual patients and cohorts of patients need. What can we handle on a more localized level? Do I read that right?
Absolutely. And I'll use a very specific example. We know that the TROA Act, the Treat Obesity Act, Treat and Reduce Obesity Act, it was introduced in the last Congress and in this Congress. The reality is that probably doesn't have the juice to go anywhere. It's introduced, and we will be fighting for that and advocating for it on the Hill. But we have to live in our reality of the politics of today. I don't know that has the legs to get all the way to the final stretch. We're going to continue to fight for that. But in the meantime, I need to build that army so that those people are prepared to advocate, whether it's TROA or whether it's another piece of legislation down the road.
Okay, so this may be a subtlety that people who don't understand government real well miss, but you know and I know. One of the big differences between federal and state governments is that state governments cannot run a deficit on a year-to-year basis, which means that you can go to the federal government and you can say, if you spend $1,000 on this year, it's going to save you $10,000 in 5 years, and that might mean something, or 3 years, and that might mean something. But if you go to a state and say that $1,000 would have to come from taxpayers, and as a result, it becomes a much harder sell, which is one of the reasons I think people worry about Medicaid funding at the state level. How can you combat that? Or is that just part of the nasty reality we're going to have to live with for a while?
I think it's the reality. I think it's the reality that we have to deal with when we go and we advocate for something at the state level. But there are ways to get around it, and maybe not in the financial sense or the budgetary sense. If we as patients, if we as caregivers connect with our politicians, both at the state and federal level, and by that I mean, are we having meetings with them in the state, or are we talking to their district directors? Are we inviting them to come to the local hospital and see what a cancer ward really looks like and the lives being saved, or a transplant department? If we encourage those elected officials, and for whatever reason, whether it be altruistic or whether they're trying to gain some political advantage, is really irrelevant. If we can get them to connect with us, and we as patients connect with them and educate them about the liver and about the lives that we have and the ability to get the drugs saving our lives, that's a moment in time. And we're doing it at the state level, and we're doing it at the federal level. And that's the work that needs to be happening now, even in the tough times when maybe, like you said, we're not winning the game and we're not winning the huge wins in politics. But if we can get a few of these access to care issues taken care of, if we can get some relationships built, if we can train more patients how to be better advocates for themselves and for the field, that's the work that needs to happen now to prepare us for what's coming in the future.
So that's the happier news. I wouldn't call it the happy news, but that's the happier news and the area where we can have impact. A couple of rather specific questions, okay, about the less happy news. You commented, and I think it's important, about longitudinal studies. And once a longitudinal study creates a gap, you can't pick it up. You got to start all over again. Are there specific major studies where we've seen that happen affecting liver patients that you're aware of?
There have been a couple mentions of very specific programs. I'm not really at liberty to talk about them. I am under an NDA with some of our funders. And oftentimes we hear about what's happening in studies that they might have coming into the, for drugs coming in the marketplace. And I'm just not at liberty to talk about that. Having said that, I think we're going to see more and more of that information come out. And the more that these researchers and patients, the ones waiting for these drugs, start to speak up, I think you'll hear more of this, but I can't really speak to some specifics right now.
Some specifics you can't speak to. Let me ask you a question that strikes me from what you just said. Well, first of all, liver trials, phase 3 and phase 4 are long trials. But it hadn't crossed my mind until listening to you, and it could be that I'm listening wrong, that this could interrupt the middle of a drug trial. It struck me more that the drug trials would continue, but you'd have a harder time getting them evaluated, and therefore, do you actually see places where drug trials are being interrupted by this kind of thing?
I would be concerned not only for the trials, I would be concerned that once a trial is done, that you have appropriate staff at the FDA to review the material, to make decisions. I would be concerned that the endpoints don't get moved. Remember, when you go into a study, you set it up on the front end of what the endpoint should be, what success would mean in that drug, as long as there's no adverse effects. But if that changes, if they move the goalposts, which has happened in the past, if they move goalposts, if you lose institutional knowledge, if trials are interrupted and data gets corrupted, that's start over. Those are long studies. These are patients' lives that are on the line here.
So specifically, I have feared everything you've described, okay, at the back end. The goalposts get moved. You have less staff, so things get handled more slowly. They might be less informed staff, so you then have to spend more time teaching them or come from a different background. But it had struck me that the only data that was in jeopardy was data that were in large government-funded studies. Because Musk came in and bragged about all these things he was cutting, and they said, whoops, and he started them all over again. But some of them, he can't do that. Is that happening in private trials as well?
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Let's imagine that your study is being done at XYU University, and that university had government contracts to do research, and all of that money, what they get is, let's say they get $1 million. If they get $1 million contract, they would get $1.2 million or $1.3 million because they have administrative costs on top of that, again, to run the building and the lights and the computers and the centrifuge. So if you take away that administrative, which is what DOGE was doing, is a lot of it was cutting administrative costs on research. If you cut that, that money will also impact that research institution that might be doing other programs and other projects. It's just in line.
They lose administrative staff, and as a result, they can't administer the program, and then you do lose data.
Imagine, like, it's just like a family, of 4 out there. They've got a certain amount of dollars every month, and they have to decide where to spend it and how to spend it. If somebody comes in and takes some of your money away, and you have to make decisions now about where the rest of your money is spent, that could impact other studies. That could impact other work being done. It could impact the number of people that you have running the facilities, and maybe they don't run them at night. Maybe they only run them 9 to 5 now, and they don't run 24/7 because they don't have staff to run the building at night. Okay, well, whatever was happening at night now is impacted. Like these are real life situations when you're talking about large research institutions.
Well, and that's before you get to the Trump administration picking particular fights with Harvard, for example.
That's a very specific situation. And I'm trying to see the glass is half full, trying to make sure that we're able to work with the folks we need to. But the reality is that those kinds of fights do affect. And if you have researchers that are maybe not from the United States, some of the best and brightest researchers in the world, they don't all come from the United States. There's an impact on that. If you're not able to bring them into, say, Harvard or Yale or to the Mayo Clinic to do a study and to lead one of your trials, that could have an impact.
So now I'll circle back to the half full side of the glass. A congresswoman from Connecticut put an op-ed piece in the Washington Post this morning saying, I don't agree with Kennedy on everything, but I do agree with him on grass, which is the idea of food safety and the government needing to be more vigilant about what it describes as safe food, and that being something Kennedy wants to do. Do you envision that kind of thing being helpful to liver patients?
I think that healthier food is always better for liver patients. We know that. So that's kind of a given. But we need to make sure that, and it does give us the opportunity to find some common ground to then have meetings and to see how we can be helpful to this administration and to RFK Jr. and to see if there are these crossovers. And it gives us an opportunity to be at a table. You have to be in the room if you want to affect change. I'm trying to make sure that we're staying relevant to this administration and we're in the room. And if that means that we find those small areas where we have common ground, we will. It doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to be very vocal about our concern for all these other areas. But yeah, nutrition is one where we feel like we could work with them. And we've already actually had some initial meetings to discuss being part of the panel. I've actually sent a letter to the administration, to RFK Jr.'s team, asking to be involved in some patient-led discussions about nutrition as we move this forward, possibly sitting on a panel if they'll happen.
Fantastic. That does sound like a great thing. So, closing question. For listeners in the U.S., what should they be doing right now, either patients or researchers or other kinds of advocates, to support what's feasible and to make as much feasible as possible, I guess?
I would give them the same advice that we're taking, which is you can always find disagreement. We've got to find commonality. We've got to find areas where we can work together, as small as they may be, depending on your organization or depending on your disease state, that we have to find some areas where we can work together. Use that as an opportunity to get your foot in the door, to continue to put the message out there, because it's not just about that nutrition program. It's about having an opportunity to be able to talk about the liver in its whole state and the whole spectrum of liver diseases once I have my foot in the door, once I'm in that meeting. So be patient, find areas of commonality, and try and make sure that you at least have a seat at the table to be part of the discussion to make sure liver is elevated.
I hear that. What I'm visualizing, because I think visually, is that given a crack to open a door to get into the first room, you then want to make people care enough about liver and understand liver well enough that they then are willing to open more doors or have broader conversations or take a look at broader issues.
Absolutely. I've always said this, Roger. You work in this space that has this kind of communications functionality to it. And I think that this is really important because when we talk about connecting with leaders, whether it's RFK Jr. or a senator or a congressman, I always look at the other side. What do they want first? I've got to give them something that's valuable to them for them to say, oh, yeah, I want that guy to be there. I want to listen to what he has to say. I'm not going to win everything right off the bat. For members of Congress, they're trying to get reelected, especially in the House. They're trying to get elected every 2 years. So for them, I'd want to give them an opportunity in their district to look good and to have a moment at the hospital with transplant surgeons and kissing babies. That's an easy one. That's what they want. And in that process, they get to know me. They get to know my family. They get to know what liver disease is. And that's my opportunity. And so I always try and reverse engineer this and say, what is it the value to them first? And then find that area where we can agree, which may or may not be large, and then try and connect the dots.
Sound like a guy who spent a lot of time on the Hill.
I did. But you know what, Roger? I love what I do now so much better. I get to wake up every morning. First of all, I sleep really well now. I didn't so much before. But I get to wake up every day knowing that we work for the Global Liver Institute. I have amazing staff, an amazing team, passionate, caring people. And we get to wake up every day and know that we're saving lives. That having this interview and talking to you goes out and maybe somebody hears it and makes a difference to save another life. I'm a very lucky person that I get to work in an area that I love, and I can take those skills from politics and apply them to doing some good, and I feel very blessed to do it.
Fantastic. And I'm thinking to go full circle on this as we wrap up. This is analogous to your Blackhawk story, which is that as you're going straight to the ground, you think you might actually pull out of it if you don't blow yourself up into such a knot that you can't do anything about it.
And to that point, there are some dark days. Some of this legislation, some of the cuts, these are dark moments for patients. I get that. I'm not trying to gloss over that. But we do have to find that silver lining sometimes and then prepare for the next stage. Mm-hmm. While you're keeping the hope up and keeping the faith, we have to prepare an infrastructure to fight this fight at a bigger and bolder level in the future so that those cuts don't happen again, so that DOGE doesn't come in. And that's my goal, is I want to build an infrastructure for this field in the liver space that is unstoppable. And we can continue to fight for patients in perpetuity.
Larry, this has been fascinating and fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's get a date. You can come back in the next few weeks and talk about everything GLI is doing that isn't this. Okay?
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, my friend. Talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks.
On behalf of the surfers, our guests, and our sponsors, Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, Liver Right, and Tawazun Health, thanks for joining us this week.
Please join us again next week when we continue our roundtables on the steatotic liver disease think tank and advances in drug development, and are joined by an outstanding SLD newsmaker.
And until next week, stay safe, surf on, and we'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.